On October 15th, something happened behind the sun that shouldn't have been possible. Three dark, silent objects appeared beside 3I Atlas, the interstellar visitor already confusing scientists for months. The sun, normally loud and alive, had been quiet for weeks. But when these three shapes entered its shadowed side, everything changed. In less than 6 minutes, the sun erupted not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each explosion timed with precision, as if reacting to their presence. Every flare was caught on NASA's own SOHO data feed. And yet, no headlines, no press release, no one said a word. So before we go any further, I want you to do one thing. Look at the clock near you. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? What part of the world? Because wherever you are, whatever the time, something on the far side of the sun may be watching back. Now stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see why silence from space agencies might be the loudest sound of all. If you've ever stared at the night sky and wondered what we're not being told, you're in the right place. And if you're new here, remember to subscribe. Not yet, not right now, but once you start feeling that chill of realization that this might not just be another cosmic coincidence, I want you to stay connected as we dig through what no one else dares to discuss. So let's begin where it all started. An amateur astronomer in Brazil named Tiago, known online as Dobsonian Power. He wasn't searching for conspiracies. He wasn't chasing UFOs. He was doing what he'd done for years, watching the sun through live data from the LASCO C3 instrument aboard NASA's Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, a satellite that's been monitoring the sun non-stop for nearly 30 years. But on that quiet Tuesday afternoon, something crossed his screen that made him freeze. At first, it looked like a faint speck moving against the bright corona of the sun, then another, then a third. They were perfectly aligned, moving as if linked. Each one slid smoothly across the frame. No wobble, no drift, no random motion. Space debris doesn't move like that. Asteroids don't travel in formation. Tiago watched as, seconds after each object vanished behind the blinding edge of the sun, the star erupted. Plasma waves tore out in arcs thousands of kilometers high, and light intensified across the spectrum. 3 eruptions, 3 objects, perfect sequence. He replayed the data, again and again. The timing was impossible to ignore. When he posted his findings online, the video went viral across astronomy forums. 3 companions behind Atlas, he wrote. 3 dark objects following it. Within hours, independent skywatchers from Mexico, Poland and Australia confirmed similar patterns. A user named Night Monkey spotted fast-moving points of light near Gemini. Another Tobazil confirmed the trajectory matched the same timeline as Tiago's footage. Multiple witnesses, independent data, different hemispheres, same phenomenon. Now here's where the mystery deepens. According to standard solar physics, nothing, absolutely nothing of that size or speed should survive near the sun's surface. The heat, radiation, and magnetic stress would tear apart even the strongest alloys. Yet these 3 objects didn't burn up. They didn't dissolve into gas trails. They passed calmly, precisely like they belonged there. NASA said nothing. ESA said nothing. The media, silent. But silence can be its own message. And in this case, it spoke volumes. Why? Because acknowledging the existence of something moving in formation behind the sun, something unexplainable, would mean rewriting fundamental laws of physics. It would mean confronting the possibility that these weren't random fragments or natural debris, that maybe, just maybe, someone or something was controlling them. To give you perspective, the odds of 3 separate objects crossing the sun in such a synchronized way, each triggering a solar eruption, are less than 1 in 10 trillion. You'd have better chances of flipping a coin and landing heads 25 times in a row. Coincidence doesn't stretch that far, and yet, the official word remained. Nothing to see here. Tiago knew what he'd seen. So did the others. They weren't guessing. They were analyzing official data, the same open source imagery available to NASA scientists themselves. The kind that can't be faked, can't be doctored without detection. So if this footage was genuine, and it means the sun reacted to something. Something not random, something deliberate. Imagine that for a moment. The largest object in our solar system, the engine of life itself, reacting as though it had been touched. Now, if this had been a meteor shower, we'd have seen particle trails. If it were a camera glitch, the movement would be inconsistent. If it were cosmic rays, the timing would be chaotic. None of that matched the data. The movement was intentional. The precision, unnatural. So what were they? That's the question mainstream science refuses to ask. Because to ask it means confronting the unthinkable. That these three dark shapes weren't accidents of nature, but agents of design. As Tiago continued reviewing frames, something else caught his attention. When he enhanced the brightness curves around each flare, the eruption didn't look random. It looked like a response. The energy pattern rippled outward as if something inside the sun had been provoked. He compared timestamps. The delay between the objects crossing and the eruption was consistent. Within 2 seconds every time. 2 seconds. In cosmic terms, that's precision engineering. That's not the universe rolling dice. That's cause and effect. And so the real question became not, did it happen? The data confirms it did, but who made it happen? Behind the sun, beyond our reach, something unfolded that day. Something calculated, something deliberate, and maybe something watching us just as we were watching it. Patterns. That's where everything either falls apart or starts to make terrifying sense. When Tiago's footage began circulating across astronomy communities, seasoned scientists stepped in, some cautiously curious, others immediately dismissive. The official line was predictable. Coincidence, instrument error, overinterpretation. But the more people examined the data, the harder it became to dismiss. 3 objects, 3 eruptions, 3 perfectly timed sequences. If that were random, it would be like shuffling a deck of cards and pulling the exact same ace 500 times in a row. Possible? Mathematically, yes, but so absurdly improbable that even chance itself would laugh. And yet, the silence from institutions, the NASA press briefings, the European Space Agency reports, the Solar Dynamics Observatory logs, was total. Not denial, just nothing. And sometimes, nothing is far more suspicious than lies. You see, probability is a cruel teacher. It doesn't care about what we want to believe. It only reflects truth through numbers, and when the probabilities start to collapse under their own weight, something else must explain what we're seeing. Tiago wasn't alone in recognizing this. Independent observers, those who live for catching rare cosmic events, began comparing notes. Night Monkey, a skywatcher known for tracking faint light anomalies, uploaded data from his Gemini telescope showing 3 fast-moving points echoing Tiago's timeline. Another observer, Basil, captured near-identical trajectories using a completely different instrument. Different eyes, different hemispheres. Same phenomenon, that's not noise, that's not coincidence, that's signal. So why then did no one in authority want to talk about it? To answer that, you have to understand something about institutions. Silence is not ignorance, it's strategy. The moment these events were confirmed, the discovery would have forced an immediate re-evaluation of everything we know about orbital mechanics, solar behavior, and even the boundaries of our own cosmic neighborhood. Think about it. What happens the instant humanity realizes that something artificial is operating near the sun? The stock markets would convulse, religious groups would erupt, governments would demand answers. Militaries would ask the unspoken question, is it a threat? It wouldn't just be a scientific revelation, it would be a geopolitical earthquake. So the safest response? Silence. Pretend it didn't happen. Wait until the story fades. But there's a flaw in that plan, because silence creates vacuum, and vacuum creates speculation. And speculation, once it starts, spreads faster than any solar wind. The deeper researchers dug, the stranger the data became. When they plotted the timing of the eruptions, they found a mirrored rhythm, a symmetry between when each object passed and when the flare ignited. The delay was almost identical every time. Someone ran a statistical model to simulate random flare patterns. Out of 10 million simulations, none matched Tiago's sequence. Not one. That's when even the skeptics began to whisper, what if this wasn't natural? Still, public statements from official channels remained absent. NASA issued no alerts, no public interest bulletins. When scientists don't want you to notice something, they bury it in routine. A silence so ordinary it feels safe, Tiago posted again. Why no comment? He asked on X. His followers doubled overnight. Others started comparing the event to earlier anomalies, the Soho triangles, the coronal spheres, the unexplained sun-diving objects captured years before but brushed aside as data artifacts. A pattern was emerging. And that's when people began using a dangerous word, cover-up. Now let's be fair. Scientists are right to be cautious. Correlation doesn't always mean causation. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. That's true science. But there's a line where skepticism turns into denial. When data contradicts your theory, you can either update the theory or ignore the data. Guess which option is easier when your career, your funding, your credibility depend on staying inside the safe zone? Thiago's data wasn't coming from a shaky smartphone camera. It was coming from LASCO, one of the most trusted instruments in solar research. It doesn't lie. And that meant the implications were very real. Could 3 synchronized eruptions really be a coincidence? Could something or someone be deliberately triggering the sun? It sounds impossible, yet remember this. Every impossible truth starts as a forbidden question. In the early 1950s, when military radar first picked up unknown aerial phenomena, governments didn't announce discovery. They classified it. They labeled it national security. They studied it in silence while the public went about its day none the wiser. So why would it be different now? Every signal, every satellite feed, every whisper from the sun passes through systems controlled by institutions, by governments, by agencies, by scientists who must follow protocol. And when something appears that doesn't fit, it's far easier to call it an instrument error than to admit we've seen something that rewrites reality. Here's what's terrifying. Though independent confirmation didn't stop, across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, small observatories began noticing the same anomaly. Some posted their data, others didn't. But those who did reported strange interference, brief disruptions in feed transmissions at the same timestamps as Thiago's footage. Solar observatories that had been online for decades suddenly went into maintenance mode. Public archives temporarily went offline. When they came back up, certain frames were missing. Coincidence? Maybe, but coincidence doesn't erase data. Someone has to. Still, not everyone stayed quiet. A physicist from Germany, one of Thiago's early supporters, leaked a private email from within a European research network. It mentioned unexpected transients near perihelion and warned analysts not to engage speculation regarding artificial origin. That line alone sparked chaos online, because if there's nothing to hide, why warn people not to talk about it? It's the same pattern every time: deny, ignore, discredit. And yet, the evidence, those 3 impossible eruptions, remains carved into the sun's data like burn marks that can't be erased. Thiago said it best in one of his later posts. If data tells you the impossible, maybe it's time to admit we've misunderstood what's possible. And that's the line we cross now, because the deeper you follow this trail, the clearer it becomes. This isn't about a comet or a coincidence. It's about a secret buried in plain sight, orbiting the one object no one ever looks behind: the sun itself. Light never lies. It bends, it scatters, it reflects, but it never lies. That's what every astrophysicist knows, and it's exactly why what came next shook even the most grounded scientists to their core. After Thiago's footage exploded online, amateur and professional astronomers alike began combing through existing data on 3I Atlas, the interstellar object at the center of it all. And that's when a strange detail surfaced from an entirely different corner of the scientific world: polarization readings. If you've never heard the term before, think of light as a vibration, like the strings of a guitar. Normally, those vibrations scatter in every direction. But when light interacts with certain surfaces, dust, crystals, metals, those vibrations begin to line up, vibrating in one preferred direction. That alignment is called polarization. It's nature's fingerprint. Every type of material, ice, dust, rock, metal, has its own way of polarizing light. It's how scientists identify what comets are made of, even from millions of kilometers away. So when researchers analyzed the light coming from 3I Atlas, they expected a normal pattern, something within the usual 0 to +2% polarization range typical for dusty comets. But instead, they found something that didn't just break the rules, it shattered them. The readings were negative. Negative polarization is rare enough, but the magnitude was unprecedented: 2.7%. That's not a small deviation. That's not a rounding error. That's an "our instruments must be broken" kind of number. At first, scientists thought there was an error, but when independent observatories in Chile, Japan, and Hawaii all confirmed the same readings, the conclusion became undeniable. 3I Atlas wasn't reflecting light the way any natural object should. And here's the part that made some researchers stop talking altogether. Negative polarization like this usually means one of 2 things. Either the surface scattering the light is made of unknown materials, something not found anywhere else in the solar system, or the surface is engineered to behave that way. That's when whispers began circulating in astronomy. Circles, quiet, fearful whispers about non-natural structure. Think about that. For decades, polarization studies have given us insight into cosmic dust, ice, and planetary atmospheres. The physics are well understood, so when an object violates every known model, when it reflects light as if its skin has a purpose beyond nature, that's not just anomaly, that's design. One astrophysicist, who later requested anonymity, wrote in his lab notes, "If this data is correct, 3I Atlas is not a comet. It's a mirror wearing a disguise." Others were more cautious. They proposed new models, what they called dust-rich, gas-poor hypotheses, trying to explain the odd light without invoking anything extraordinary. According to these models, Atlas might just be made of extremely dense, compact dust grains with little or no gas. That would, theoretically, change how it reflected sunlight. Reasonable. Maybe. Convenient? Absolutely. Because that explanation allowed everyone to keep pretending nothing out of the ordinary was happening. It was safe. It kept the textbooks intact. But not everyone was buying it. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who famously suggested that the interstellar object Oumuamua could have been artificial, stepped into the discussion. He didn't claim 3I Atlas was alien. He didn't need to. He simply pointed out that the numbers didn't add up. If the observed polarization was real, it suggested a surface smooth at the microscopic level, but structured in ways that defied natural formation. The ratios between polarized and unpolarized light were consistent, not chaotic, suggesting uniformity, as if the material had been manufactured. Imagine this: a probe coated with materials that scatter sunlight in specific ways, making it almost invisible from certain angles. A stealth system, not for war but for cosmic travel. A ship hiding in the glare of the sun. That's when the conversation shifted from how to why. Why would something need to hide behind the sun? If you wanted to observe a planet without detection, that's the one place you'd go. Behind the star, in perfect shadow, shielded from direct view by blinding light. From there, you could watch Earth unseen, monitor every signal, every satellite, every pulse of electromagnetic chatter. Now, that sounds like science fiction, until you remember that our own scientists have used solar shadows for decades to observe gravitational lensing and cosmic background radiation. Hiding behind the sun isn't just possible, it's smart physics. As polarization data continued to pour in, new anomalies appeared. The angle of polarization, essentially the direction in which light was being organized, shifted unpredictably as 3I Atlas rotated. Normally, such changes would correspond to natural tumbling or jet activity, but Atlas showed neither. The pattern was controlled, repeating every 23 hours, as though something inside it was adjusting orientation. A self-stabilizing mechanism, a kind of guidance system. NASA's response: silence. The European Southern Observatory? No comment. Even peer-reviewed journals that had once eagerly published cometary data now delayed papers about Atlas for further review. Further review. Those two words are the bureaucratic equivalent of "we don't want to talk" about this right now. Still, a few brave researchers published anyway. The paper by Gray et al., quietly uploaded to an astrophysical preprint server, documented the polarization anomaly in detail. It used cautious language, phrases like unusual surface texture and non-standard scattering behavior. But between the lines, you could read the fear, because once you admit that something out there reflects light in a way no natural body can, you've crossed a line that science isn't ready for. One late-night podcast featuring a retired astronomer summed it up bluntly. If these readings are right, then Atlas isn't a comet, it's a message, a signal, something built, not born. Of course, mainstream media didn't touch it. The topic was radioactive. Mentioning artificial structure in the same sentence as interstellar object was career suicide. But the data was there, immutable and public. Anyone could download it. Anyone could run the analysis. And thousands did. On Reddit forums, amateur physicists plotted the same graphs, matched the same negative curves, and realized they all pointed to the same impossible truth. The surface of 3I Atlas absorbed and reflected light, as though it were made of layered composites, materials we only produce in advanced labs. The idea spread like wildfire. What if 3I Atlas wasn't just a traveler from another system, but a messenger? What if those three companion objects seen near the sun weren't random debris, but escorts, or worse, controllers? If that's true, then 3i Atlas isn't an isolated mystery. It's a mission, one we were never supposed to notice, and yet we did. We saw it, we measured it, we recorded it. The question is, did it see us? When Tiago looked back at his footage, he noticed something eerie. The light of the eruptions, when viewed frame by frame, showed faint streaks of secondary reflection, almost like the objects were catching the flare and redirecting it. No one could explain it, not naturally, at least. By now, the data, the patterns, the polarization, it was all too big to dismiss. But instead of investigation came the oldest tactic in history: silence. Scientists who spoke publicly were ignored. Independent data vanished. Telescope feeds froze midstream. And in that silence, something even stranger happened. Solar activity, after weeks of violent outbursts, dropped suddenly. The sun went quiet again, dead quiet, as though whatever had stirred it was now gone. Or finished. So what exactly was 3i Atlas? A rogue comet made of impossible material? A natural relic from another galaxy? Or something far beyond comprehension? Something deliberately constructed to appear ordinary while carrying out a hidden purpose. Light never lies, but sometimes it reveals more than we're ready to see. Spectroscopy is the language of the universe. Every atom, every molecule speaks through light, each one leaving a distinct pattern of lines, a barcode written across the cosmos. It's how we know what stars are made of, what gases float in a nebula, and even what elements exist on planets we'll never touch. But what happens when something refuses to speak the language at all? That's the question scientists began asking once the first chemical readings of 3i Atlas came in. When Tiago's discovery started gaining traction online, astrophysicists from observatories in Hawaii and the Canary Islands decided to reanalyze archived spectrographic data of Atlas taken months earlier. Normally, a comet's spectrum is easy to decode. It glows with familiar signatures: cyanide, carbon chains, water vapor, hydroxyl, and a faint blend of metallic ions like sodium and magnesium. But Atlas wasn't playing by the rules. Its spectral data showed silence. Not absence, exactly, just wrongness. Instead of the usual bright emission lines, the graph displayed jagged, inconsistent peaks that didn't match any known molecular combination. It was like tuning into a song and hearing notes that don't exist on any instrument. At first, researchers thought the signal was corrupted. Calibration error, cosmic ray interference, a glitch in the CCD sensors, take your pick. But when the data was rechecked, then verified through different telescopes using entirely separate systems, the results were identical. Atlas's light signature wasn't simply unfamiliar, it was impossible. A comet can't have a spectrum like that. Even interstellar bodies obey universal chemistry. Hydrogen is hydrogen everywhere. Oxygen, carbon, iron, they all burn and absorb light the same way across galaxies. But Atlas showed absorption gaps, entire regions of the visible spectrum where light should exist but didn't. It was as if something was actively filtering it. One researcher from the Max Planck Institute wrote privately, "The absorption bands are too clean, not random, structured, like engineered filters." In other words, whatever covered Atlas's surface wasn't dust or rock, it was material with purpose. That single phrase leaked into the online community, spreading faster than any official report could contain it. Material with purpose. Within days, conspiracy forums and legitimate scientific circles were echoing the same idea. Could Atlas be wrapped in something artificial? Something meant to hide its true nature? You see, when light is absorbed selectively, it's not just random darkness, it's code. Engineers on Earth use similar techniques in stealth coatings and satellite shielding. By absorbing specific wavelengths, a surface can conceal its temperature, mask its motion, or even trick sensors into thinking it's something else entirely. So, was 3i Atlas camouflaged? Let that question settle for a moment. An interstellar object, wrapped in a material that defies natural chemistry, drifting quietly through our solar system, right up until it passed near the sun. And then, as Tiago's footage proved, the sun reacted. If it were a machine, a probe, it wouldn't be the first time the universe hinted at such things. Remember Oumuamua, the first recorded interstellar visitor back in 2017. It entered our solar system at a strange angle, accelerated as if pushed by something other than gravity, and left without a trace of the cometary tail everyone expected. Scientists eventually proposed a dozen natural explanations, but none fit perfectly. Harvard's Avi Loeb suggested it could have been a light sail, a thin engineered object propelled by sunlight. That theory was ridiculed, until now, because Atlas was behaving like Oumuamua's sequel, but louder. Where Oumuamua slipped through quietly, Atlas interacted. It provoked. It caused the sun itself to respond. When the spectral data of Atlas was overlaid with that of Oumuamua, something astonishing emerged. A faint but consistent harmonic pattern. Both showed missing absorption lines at similar wavelengths, bands corresponding to carbon-based compounds under extreme heat. In other words, both objects may have shared the same kind of coating. And yet, the difference was scale. Atlas was larger, brighter, more erratic. It disintegrated partially as it approached the sun, or seemed to. But according to one deep space monitoring report, the debris field didn't behave like vaporized rock. Instead, fragments decelerated unnaturally, maintaining stable trajectories, like controlled separation. If that's true, then what astronomers called disintegration was something else entirely, a maneuver. Imagine a probe shedding modules as it reaches a target zone. Imagine each fragment deploying silently, aligning itself behind the sun, the exact same side where Tiago captured those 3 dark objects days later. Now the puzzle fits. Spectroscopy gave us the chemical whisper. Tiago's footage gave us the visual scream. Together, they told one chilling story. 3i Atlas might not have fallen apart. It might have activated. Some tried to explain it differently. A paper from the University of Tokyo proposed a volatile fragmentation hypothesis, that Atlas was simply made of unstable ices that vaporized under solar heat. But again, the math didn't fit. The mass loss rate was too consistent. The fragments didn't follow ballistic curves. It wasn't random destruction. It was precision unfolding. Tiago himself noticed it before anyone else did. Reviewing time-lapse footage, he realized the object didn't just brighten, it pulsed. Regularly, every 11 minutes and 32 seconds. The brightness curve was clean and repeated for nearly 24 hours before fading completely. That's not how comets behave. That's how signals behave. When he shared that data, the pushback was immediate. Forums were locked. His posts mysteriously vanished from social platforms, but copies survived, mirrored across backup sites, and reposted by followers who refused to let the evidence die. In one archived thread, a user analyzed the pulse intervals and noted something remarkable. The rhythm matched the modulation patterns of early deep space communication arrays, almost identical to Earth's own spacecraft beacon intervals. Coincidence, or a pattern too precise to ignore? If 3i Atlas was communicating, or worse, responding, then its approach to the sun wasn't random at all. It was intentional, a handshake maybe, or a test. Because think about it. What better way to test a star's behavior, or a planet's reaction, than by triggering the very heart of its solar system? And if that's what truly happened, then the silence of the agencies isn't strange anymore. It's expected, because once you realize something non-human may have just interacted with the sun itself, you have to ask the next terrifying question. Who or what was on the receiving end of that message? Tiago couldn't sleep for nights after seeing those pulse intervals. He wasn't just staring at numbers anymore, he was staring at intent. And somewhere, buried deep inside all that light, was purpose. Spectroscopy doesn't lie. It can't, but sometimes it tells the kind of truth that humans aren't ready to face. In space, there's no such thing as coincidence, only timing. And in science, timing is everything. When data disappears, when timestamps don't align, when silence replaces explanation, that's when truth stops being lost and starts being hidden. It began quietly, almost innocently. A few amateur astronomers, mostly hobbyists who download live solar observation feeds for fun, began noticing strange gaps in NASA's publicly accessible LASCO archives. Normally, the observatory uploads new frames every few minutes, uninterrupted sequences of solar imagery dating back decades. Each frame timestamped, numbered, permanent. But in mid-April, just days after Tiago's footage went viral, the uploads began skipping. 3 frames missing, then 7, then entire hours gone. The most dedicated data archivists, the ones who automatically mirror every public SOHO image, confirmed the anomaly wasn't on their end. The missing frames weren't corrupt, they were removed. To the casual observer, that might sound trivial. A system glitch, maybe a technical hiccup. But to those who know how these archives work, it was alarming. SOHO's feed doesn't just stop, it runs through multiple redundant systems. Losing even a single frame requires either manual intervention or intentional deletion. One user from France, known online as SolarWatcher1976, posted a before and after comparison. Identical sequences from the C2 and C3 instruments, with one crucial difference: the original batch, downloaded automatically the moment they were uploaded, contained several frames no longer visible on NASA's official portal. When he re-uploaded his findings, the thread vanished within hours. Reposted again. Deleted again. A pattern emerged. Every time someone highlighted the missing frames, that content didn't last more than a day. That's when people realized this wasn't a malfunction. It was a cleanup operation. The timing made it even more suspicious. Every missing block of data aligned perfectly with moments surrounding the 3I Atlas activity, the very same hours when the three mysterious objects had crossed the sun. It wasn't just NASA either. The European Space Agency's Pro-BA2 satellite, which also monitors solar events, displayed identical timestamp gaps. Even the Japanese Hinode Observatory went offline for scheduled calibration, a coincidence that somehow occurred simultaneously across multiple independent systems. Scheduled calibration. At the same time the sun reacted violently, even the calmest scientist would raise an eyebrow at that. Soon, the community started cataloguing the lost hours. April 14th, 3:02 to 3:29 UTC. April 15th, 5:11 to 5:42 UTC. April 17th, 2:58 to 3:16 UTC. 3 separate gaps, 3 missing sequences, 3 objects. If you're counting, that's no coincidence. That's choreography. Thiago, now flooded with messages from across the globe, decided to investigate personally. He'd been archiving solar data for years, maintaining local backups on external drives. He cross-referenced his old captures with the official feeds. And sure enough, frames that existed locally were gone from the official database. One in particular stood out, time-stamped April 15th, 05:16:02 UTC. In that frame, faint silhouettes could be seen emerging from the solar limb, exactly where the eruption began. No glare, no compression artifacts, just 3 small, defined shadows. He enhanced the image carefully, avoiding overexposure. The result was chilling. Each object had symmetry, right angles, geometry. Nature rarely builds in straight lines. It was enough to make him stop breathing for a moment. He sent the image to several astrophotography experts, all of whom confirmed the enhancement process was legitimate. The geometry was there. Whatever those objects were, they weren't fragments or dust clouds. They were solid, and they were moving in sync. A few days later, when Thiago tried to re-access the SOHO database, his connection was repeatedly timed out. The servers were online. He could browse older data. But the specific sequence of dates around April 14th 17 now returned an unavailable message. He wasn't the only one. Across forums, observers from Australia, Poland, and Japan began posting identical screenshots. Frame not found. Data unavailable. That phrase became a meme overnight. Data unavailable, the new code for "they're hiding something." Of course, official responses were predictable. NASA's spokesperson dismissed the missing data as routine data buffering caused by temporary transmission interference. But every professional who's ever worked with these instruments knows buffering doesn't delete files. It delays uploads maybe. It doesn't make timestamps vanish. Something had been redacted. The silence grew louder. One European data analyst published a detailed timeline comparing known solar events with archive interruptions. His conclusion was unnerving. The probability of those time gaps aligning by chance with Thiago's object crossings was less than 1 in 100 million. He didn't claim conspiracy. He didn't need to. The math said it all. By late May, other anomalies began surfacing. The Stereo A spacecraft, positioned to observe the sun's far side, suddenly switched its data access to restricted. Its usual public feeds went dark. Even the Deep Space Network, the massive antenna system that communicates with all deep space probes, began showing unexplained scheduling gaps on their downlink logs during those same windows. Something big was happening. Behind the scenes, something coordinated. Thiago received an anonymous message one night through a private astronomy forum. No name, No traceable metadata, just a file and a single line of text. They didn't remove everything. Look between the frames. The file contained raw FITS data, the original format used by space instruments before being converted into the images seen online. When Tiago opened it and compared sequential data points, he realized what the message meant. Even though the visible frames had been deleted, the telemetry headers remained. Each header recorded the brightness average across pixels, the solar wind density, and the magnetometer readings for that exact timestamp. And within those invisible data traces, he found something undeniable. Each missing frame corresponded to a sudden, localized spike in solar radiation, too focused to be a random flare. The data showed directed bursts of energy, narrow, short-lived, and precise, almost as if the sun wasn't erupting spontaneously, but reacting to something that had touched it. That was the moment Tiago stopped doubting. The missing frames weren't about protecting the public from panic. They were about hiding proof. Proof that whatever passed behind the sun didn't just pass. It interacted. It changed something. He uploaded his findings discreetly to a mirrored cloud drive, naming the folder simply Echoes. Within 24 hours, the link stopped working. Account suspended. Reason: violation of data sharing policies. When he appealed, the service provider's automated response was simple. This content has been removed following a government request. Tiago never said which government. He didn't have to, because by then the pattern was global. Every time someone got too close to the truth, something, or someone, reached out and erased it. But no matter how much data disappears, you can't erase the pattern itself. And if the sun truly reacted to an external presence, then the implications go far beyond one missing frame. It means we're not alone in the sky anymore, and the ones who are don't want to be seen. Energy leaves fingerprints. You can delete files, block signals, even silence witnesses, but you can't hide physics. Every pulse, every wave, every burst of radiation that crosses the void leaves a scar on instruments built to listen. That's how the next stage of the mystery began. Quietly, invisibly, through the hum of sensors orbiting above our heads. In the weeks after the data gaps appeared, satellite engineers across several nations began logging unusual interference reports. Nothing catastrophic, just flickers, data corruption, erratic magnetometer readings. Normally, space weather is the first suspect. Solar flares and geomagnetic storms can throw electronics into chaos. But this time, the solar activity chart was nearly flat, the sun strangely calm. Yet satellites behaved as though something had brushed past them. At 03:14 UTC on April 21st, an anomaly rippled through NOAA's GOES-16 satellite. Instruments registered a microburst of radiation localized to a single detector. It lasted exactly 1.7 seconds, too short for a natural cosmic ray, too strong to be noise. The signature looked almost like a coded pulse, rising sharply, dropping, then repeating at half amplitude, like a double tap. That same hour, ground stations in India, Finland, and Argentina detected simultaneous magnetic spikes. They weren't aligned with any auroral activity or solar wind. It was as if the planet had been pinged, briefly, deliberately. Tiago heard about it from one of his online contacts, a radio technician named Lars Helmström, who monitored deep space frequencies from a rural observatory in Sweden. Lars had been tracking a faint carrier signal near 229 MHz, usually a quiet band reserved for space telemetry. The night of the anomalies, his spectrum analyzer caught a short burst. 3 narrow pulses spaced exactly 11 minutes 32 seconds apart. The same rhythm Tiago had documented in Atlas's light curve. Coincidence? Lars didn't think so. He sent Tiago the raw waterfall display, a rainbow of frequencies recorded in real time. The pulses appeared crystal sharp, cutting through background noise like a blade. Even stranger, they contained subharmonics that looked eerily structured, almost binary. When Tiago ran the data through signal analysis software, he noticed repeating ratios, 3:1, 5:2, 3:1 again. Patterns too mathematical to be random cosmic noise. Someone or something was transmitting. And then came the ground disturbance. On April 22nd, power stations across South America reported simultaneous voltage surges lasting only fractions of a second. The spikes were so brief they didn't trip most safety systems, but they were recorded. Engineers initially blamed geomagnetic fluctuations until they realized the sun had produced no flares that day. The magnetosphere was quiet. The sky was clear. Still, instruments deep underground twitched, as if something invisible had brushed past Earth's field. Across the Atlantic, seismic monitors in Portugal registered faint tremors with no geological origin. The frequencies didn't match tectonic movement. They matched electromagnetic resonance, almost like the planet itself was vibrating in response to an external frequency. Whatever had disturbed the satellites was now echoing through the Earth. For those paying attention, a chilling picture began to form. The sun flares. 3 objects appear. Data vanishes. Then, weeks later, Earth hums with invisible pulses that mirror the same timing patterns seen in Atlas's signal. If this were fiction, the audience would demand proof. But the proof was in the numbers, scattered across agencies that refused to talk to each other. Lars tried reaching out to official channels, first to ESA, then to Sweden's Institute of Space Physics. Both responded politely, promising to review his data. 2 days later, his observatory server was hacked. Logs wiped. Network connection cut for 48 hours. When the system came back online, the archived spectral files were gone. Only a single text file remained, empty except for 1 line of code. 0 wal. 0 null. Whoever, or whatever, had deleted his data wanted to send a message. Meanwhile, other researchers started noticing subtle changes in the ionosphere. GPS accuracy dropped across northern latitudes. High-frequency radio operators described phantom static, bursts of noise repeating every 11.5 minutes. Even weather satellites began misaligning their orbital telemetry, as if some unseen gravitational nudge was tugging at them. All small events, each easily dismissed in isolation. But together, they painted a pattern as precise as the stars themselves. Thiago spent sleepless nights cross-referencing every timestamp. April 15, objects cross the sun. April 21, goes 16 pulse. April 22, global magnetic spikes. Every event separated by multiples of 3 days, plus 23 hours, the rotation period he'd already measured from Atlas's pulsing brightness. It was a chain reaction. Something had spoken near the sun, and now Earth was whispering back in electromagnetic echoes. He began to wonder if the planet itself was being scanned, mapped, or perhaps tested. Then came the broadcast nobody could explain. On April 25th, amateur astronomers in Australia reported a strange low-frequency transmission bleeding through shortwave bands. The signal drifted slowly downward, modulating like a heartbeat. At first, people thought it was a military test, but the pattern repeated in intervals matching Atlas's pulse yet again. Someone uploaded a recording to YouTube before it was taken down. If you listened carefully, beneath the static, you could hear a rhythm, like syllables too slow for language. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, then a long, low sweep that faded into silence. The title of the video read, "The Sun is Talking Back." It reached 800,000 views before being flagged and removed, and so the story that began with missing frames now stretched all the way to our own. Skies governments issued no comment. Agencies denied interference, but air traffic systems quietly updated their protocols for unknown electromagnetic variables. Satellites were ordered to rotate shielding toward the sun, even though official forecasts predicted no threat. If you were listening carefully, you could hear it, the world preparing for something it refused to name. And still, those 3 pulses continued, faint and relentless, circling the Earth every 11 minutes and 32 seconds. Thiago stared at the spectrogram one last time before shutting down his computer. If light was the language of the universe, then energy was its heartbeat. And right now, that heartbeat had changed rhythm. He whispered to himself the question he hadn't dared post online. Is this how first contact begins? Or how extinction starts? Because somewhere behind the sun, the silence was no longer empty. It was listening. When governments panic, they don't issue press releases. They form committees, and somewhere inside those committees, someone always talks. By early May, whispers had begun slipping through the cracks. Small leaks from engineers, mid-level technicians, and anonymous insiders who'd seen too much telemetry to believe the official story. Nothing public, nothing concrete, just quiet emails, encrypted messages, and late-night calls that all told the same story. Someone at the highest levels was asking the wrong kind of questions about the sun, its started with an internal bulletin from the European Space Agency labeled Solar Observation Data Integrity Review. Officially, it was a harmless audit, checking data consistency across the SOHO, Probe A2 and Solar Orbiter missions, but one line buried near the end caught attention. Cross-correlate anomalous telemetry between April 14, 17 with stereo A restricted files. Report non-thermal signatures directly to coordinator. Non-thermal signatures. That's bureaucratic code for something that releases energy without heat. When a junior data technician leaked that excerpt to a journalist friend in Vienna, it spread quietly across encrypted chat rooms. A few days later, the technician's online profiles vanished. Accounts deleted, phone disconnected, apartment emptied. His colleagues said he'd transferred divisions. No record of where. Around the same time, NASA held a closed-door meeting with the US Department of Energy and representatives from the Pentagon's Space Command. Official topic, geomagnetic risk preparedness. Unofficially, according to one attendee who later contacted Tiago under the alias Orion 17, the discussion centered on non-catalogued transsolar bodies. Tiago didn't know whether to believe him at first, until Orion 17 sent a snippet of internal communication logs. The message headers matched NASA's own relay domains, the language unmistakably technical. Spectral suppression confirmed at coordinates H56 Metzmer, plan 23 degree. Recommend reclassification under anomalous electromagnetic event. That same day, multiple observatories lost external access to their solar databases. Temporary maintenance, they said. Tiago could feel it happening in real time. The information tightening like a noose. The pattern of silence had evolved into containment, but leaks have gravity of their own. The more you try to bury them, the heavier they pull toward daylight. A week later, an email reached Tiago's encrypted inbox from an address ending in .gov.r, a domain belonging to Brazil's National Space Institute, INPE. The message contained no greeting, just a single attached PDF titled Magnetopause Delta 3 Summary. Inside were 5 pages of sensor readings showing irregular oscillations in Earth's magnetic boundary, spikes synchronized exactly with the same 11-minute, 32-second interval he'd tracked from Atlas's pulse. At the bottom of the report, one note stood out. Pattern persists. Possible correlation with external artificial modulation source. That single word, artificial, changed everything. Tiago realized it wasn't just him and a handful of hobbyists noticing. People inside the system knew. They were watching the same patterns, drawing the same conclusions, and being told to keep quiet. Then came the whistleblower, a former contractor from the Deep Space Network. She called herself Marina, reached out through an astronomy forum's private chat. Her tone was calm, precise, the voice of someone used to precision and secrecy. She claimed she had worked on telemetry routing for NASA's Canberra complex, one of the 3 massive antenna arrays that keep contact with spacecraft across the solar system. According to Marina, during the week following the solar eruptions, their team received an unscheduled transmission on a non-assigned channel. It wasn't from any known probe or satellite. The signal appeared for exactly 9 minutes, repeating a 3-tone harmonic pattern before vanishing. Every attempt to trace it failed. The data packet contained no recognizable binary structure, only amplitude modulation that, when graphed, formed a perfect spiral. Not a random scribble, a golden ratio spiral. That's the same mathematical pattern found in galaxies, hurricanes, nautilus shells, the geometry of nature itself. When Marina's supervisor flagged it as potential interference, higher command ordered an immediate data lock. The packet was transferred to a classified server, and all discussion of the event was prohibited. Days later, her contract was terminated. She didn't care about fame or revenge. She wanted someone to know it had happened. Her last message to Tiago read, "They told us it was nothing." But nothing doesn't sing in Fibonacci. Tiago stared at that line for hours. It was poetic, terrifying, and profoundly logical all at once. If Marina's account was true, the golden ratio transmission wasn't a random anomaly. It was a signature. A way of saying we understand your mathematics, a handshake in the universal language of proportion. But here's the question that gnawed at everyone who saw the data. Why send it once, for only 9 minutes, and never again? Some believed it was a test, a ping to see who was listening. Others thought it was a warning, a whisper to the agencies that had been erasing evidence. We see you too. Meanwhile, international cooperation quietly intensified. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs convened an unannounced solar coordination review. Russia, China, the United States, and the European Union all sent representatives. Officially, the topic was solar observation safety. Off-record transcripts leaked weeks later told a different story. Delegates discussed potential non-human artifact interaction and strategic communication containment. Every word was clinical, detached, but beneath the jargon lay panic. For the first time, the world's most powerful institutions were whispering the same forbidden thought that had haunted Tiago for months. Something behind the sun had revealed itself, and humanity wasn't ready to see it. At home in Brazil, Tiago's nights became restless. He could feel the eyes on him now. The silent accounts that joined his live streams, only to vanish mid-chat. The phone calls that cut to static whenever he mentioned Atlas. He didn't know whether to be afraid or honored, because somewhere, perhaps on the far side of that blinding star, an intelligence had looked our way, and for reasons we couldn't understand, it had chosen to knock only once, just loud enough for a few of us to hear. Tiago opened a new journal entry on his computer and typed 8 words he never intended anyone to read. They aren't hiding from us. They're protecting us. He didn't know why he wrote it. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. Maybe he'd finally realized that the silence wasn't human at all. Would you like me to continue with part 8 next, the escalation, where strange global phenomena begin appearing? Unexplained sky flashes, compass deviations, and the first human physical effects of the sun's hidden conversation. For days, the world looked normal. The skies were clear, satellites stable, solar forecasts quiet. Then the compass needles began to move. It started with small, almost comic reports. Pilots over the South Atlantic complaining that headings drifted a few degrees off course before snapping back. Surveyors in Canada finding their magnetometers creeping east. At first, everyone blamed equipment. Magnetic drift happens all the time, but this was different. The shifts came in bursts, exactly every 11 minutes and 32 seconds. That number again. The pulse of Atlas. By the second week of May, the deviations grew stronger. Civil aviation networks logged hundreds of compass discrepancies. Smartphone sensors across the northern hemisphere began glitching in synchrony. No solar storm, no aurora, no explanation. Tiago sat in front of his computer, watching a global map of magnetometer data. Every 11 minutes and 32 seconds, colored bands flared across the display like a heartbeat spreading through the planet's veins. He whispered the timing aloud each time it happened until it became a kind of mantra. Meanwhile, in Alaska, scientists at the Poker Flat Research Range launched a routine ionospheric sounding rocket. The payload returned strange readings. A thin shell of ionized particles circling at nearly 900 kilometers altitude, moving faster than orbital physics allowed. The layer wasn't natural plasma. It carried coherence, an ordered oscillation as if it were following an external metronome. The report never reached public release. A redacted summary simply stated, "Electromagnetic coherence event, under review." But the planet was already feeling it. Radio operators reported new dead zones that opened and closed in rhythm with the pulse. Submarine communications in the Pacific failed intermittently. Even power grids began to hum, an audible low tone that engineers couldn't locate. It wasn't dangerous, not yet, but it was everywhere. People noticed in subtle ways. Streetlights flickering in identical intervals across whole districts. Elevator control systems resetting for no reason. Heart rate monitors in hospitals briefly syncing. Patients' pulses rising and falling together as though caught in the same unseen tide. Tiago posted a video compilation, security camera footage of lamps blinking in unison across 4 continents. The caption read, "The world is breathing with the sun." It hit 1 million views in hours, then vanished like the others. Governments finally broke their silence, but only to calm the markets. Minor geomagnetic fluctuation, they said, no public risk. Yet airports quietly recalibrated navigation systems, and space agencies placed sensitive satellites into safe mode. Moves that don't happen for minor anything. The few journalists still chasing the story began comparing notes, one from Spain, another from Japan, and an independent researcher from South Africa discovered that during each global pulse, high-altitude lightning, called sprites, spiked dramatically. Usually these crimson flashes above thunderstorms are rare. Now they erupted in geometric clusters forming triangles, circles, even near-perfect spirals. Photographs from weather balloons showed something else hidden in those shapes. Faint shadows, straight lines cutting across the glowing patterns, like the frame of a machine behind the clouds. Were they optical illusions? Artifacts? No one could say, but each frame carried the same timestamp alignment. 11 minutes and 32 seconds apart. The pattern had become planetary. Thiago couldn't shake the thought that Earth itself was being scanned, each pulse another sweep of some unimaginable radar brushing across continents. He wasn't alone. Seismologists in Iceland noticed micro-vibrations matching the pulse period, too weak to be tectonic yet perfectly synchronized worldwide. "It's like someone's knocking on the crust," one of them said on a leaked call. The human body began to notice as well. Emergency rooms reported clusters of people complaining of sudden ear pressure, dizziness, or metallic taste at identical intervals. Doctors blamed stress, Wi-Fi, coincidence, but sensors told a colder story. The electromagnetic field around Earth was oscillating by fractions of microteslas, small enough that only the most sensitive instruments, or the most sensitive people, could feel it. Through it all, the sun remained disturbingly quiet, its surface smooth, no flares, no sunspots large enough to account for anything. It was as if the star had given all its noise to the planet and now watched in silence. Late one night, Thiago opened a live magnetometer feed. The line on the screen was steady, peaceful. He almost convinced himself it was over. Then, without warning, the signal spiked, higher than ever before, and his room lights dimmed for a heartbeat. Outside, every dog in the neighborhood began barking. He checked the clock. Old 2:56 a.m. Exactly 11 minutes and 32 seconds since the last spike. He whispered, "You're still here." Moments later, a faint tremor rolled through the ground. Not an earthquake, just a single pulse deep and soft like the planet exhaling. In that instant, Thiago realized this wasn't random interference anymore. It was escalation. Somewhere behind the sun, the source had increased power. The conversation wasn't finished. It was getting louder, and for the first time, the entire Earth was listening, whether it wanted to or not. Silence can't last forever. Even the most secret governments eventually need a plan, something they can call control. By early June, world observatories were overwhelmed. Every magnetometer, radio dish, and weather satellite carried the same repeating pulse, the 11-minute 32-second heartbeat that refused to stop. It wasn't strong enough to damage electronics, but it was strong enough to hum through every network on Earth. Air traffic, control blamed system clock interference. Telecommunications, companies called it spectrum noise, but inside secure meeting rooms, the language changed. Unknown external modulation. The United States called for an emergency session of the International Space Surveillance Network. The official note cited orbital debris risk, yet every scientist in the room knew they were really talking about Atlas. Representatives from Russia, China, India, and the EU joined through encrypted links. The first slide shown on the screen was not a photograph, but a pulse train graph. 11 minutes, 32 seconds apart. Perfectly clean. Identical to the patterns Thiago and Lars had logged. The man chairing the meeting, Dr. Sanjay Khatri from the Indian Space Research Organization, spoke first. "If it's an error, we find the source. If it's not," he paused, "then someone out there is calling the sun." No one laughed. They decided on an experiment, codenamed Project Helios Echo. The plan was deceptively simple. Aim a narrowband radio pulse at the sun's far side, tune to the same harmonic frequencies found in the Atlas signal, and watch for any measurable change in solar behavior. A reply would prove intelligence. Silence would end the hysteria. The hardware already existed. An aging probe called Pioneer Magneto, launched a decade earlier and now drifting quietly near Mercury's orbit. Its transmitter was weak but intact. Engineers calculated that if the probe used the sun as a reflector, the signal might reach the hidden side where the unknown objects had once been seen. They scheduled the transmission for June 11th at 00 UTC. Only a handful of people knew. Officially, it was a plasma density calibration test. Unofficially, it was humanity's first deliberate message into the darkness behind the sun. Thiago didn't learn about it from the news. He learned from Marina. Her voice trembled through a late-night call, routed through 3 proxies. "They're going to ping it," she said. "They think if it's there, it'll answer. And if it does, then they'll wish it hadn't." He recorded the call, stored it offline, and waited. At exactly midnight, observatories across the world reported a faint spike, a narrow radio flash at 1420 MHz. The hydrogen line, the universal frequency used in cosmic SETI experiments. Pioneer Magneto's dish had done its job. The pulse disappeared into solar glare, invisible to the naked eye. For 10 long minutes, nothing happened. Then, at 0:11:32 UTC, the sun flared, not violently, not chaotically, but precisely. A symmetrical ring of plasma bloomed around its equator, lasting exactly 9 minutes. Instruments recorded an increase in radio flux matching the same frequency Pioneer had sent. Every console in the control room froze. When the light faded, the data showed something impossible. A return pulse, identical in shape, but delayed by exactly 22 minutes and 64 seconds, double the Atlas interval. Like an echo acknowledging receipt. Project Helios Echo had succeeded. Something had replied. What happened after that signal still divides scientists today. The official report called it instrumental feedback, a harmless reflection caused by Pioneer Magneto's antenna. But off the record, everyone in that control room knew the pattern was too precise, the delay too deliberate. The sun had answered. Maybe it was resonance within its magnetic field, maybe a natural echo of cosmic noise, or maybe something older, patient, and aware on the far side of light itself. Within hours, the raw data vanished from public servers. Governments issued routine maintenance notices. The headlines moved on. Yet every 11 minutes and 32 seconds, the same faint radio tremor still ripples through deep space receivers, a reminder that the conversation may never have ended. So tonight, when you look at the stars, remember that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's waiting. And if this story made you wonder what else hides behind the everyday news of our universe, tell me in the comments what you think really replied from behind the sun and where you're watching from right now. If you'd like more space mysteries told like this one, tap subscribe and stay with us for the next exploration. Until then, keep your eyes on the night sky.